studying long-term effects of strokes and how to lessen the damage.
6 News' Joe Harris talked to researchers involved in the effort who say the impacts may be far-reaching.
We are synthesizing small molecules.
The National Institutes of Health awarded Creighton University's School of Medicine an 18-month, $800,000 research grant to study a certain type of stroke. It's called global cerebral ischemia, and it typically happens after someone suffers cardiac arrest.
When you have injury or infection, inflammation can be activated as a part of immune response to protect your body or brain. However, the prolonged inflammation can be harmful.
Dr. Jian Huang says inflammation in the brain following ischemic stroke may be the culprit behind brain tissue death, leading to problems with learning, memory, and decision-making. Researchers want to see if targeting a receptor in some cells is key to lessening that damage.
We think that by targeting neuroinflammation, we can prevent the tissue death and the problems with learning and memory that we see following stroke.
As part of their study, researchers are using rats. They simulate a stroke, inject them with a drug, and then examine their brain tissue. Some of the rats are also tested to see how well they remember things while exploring certain setups.
If we can show that neuroinflammation has a role in global ischemic stroke, we have found and implicated like a whole range of different targets for further study.
But there is no drug, there is no medicine, or there is no treatment so far. So we expect that we can open the new gates to develop this potential treatment.
And potentially decrease the damage from traumatic stroke. On your side, Joe Harris, 6 News.
Creighton researchers say neuroinflammation has been seen in dementia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease, so their study may have even wider impacts.